So I want you to look at your kitchen counter right now. Or, maybe your dining table. If there happens to be an apple sitting there, I really want you to just look at it for a second.
Because you probably just see a snack, right?
Right, exactly. Like just a simple, completely ordinary piece of grocery store fruit. The kind of thing you just throw into a lunchbox without a second thought.
Yeah, it's so common, it's almost invisible to us.
It really is. But what if I told you that you aren't just looking at a piece of fruit? What if you are actually looking at a highly engineered biological billboard that was, originally designed to attract extinct Ice Age megafauna?
Which is a wild concept to wrap your head around.
It's totally wild. You're looking at a living, breathing Victorian-era ghost. You're looking at literally the single most heavily mythologized object in human history.
And it's incredibly easy to be blind to all that, simply because everyday objects are just so ubiquitous. But the moment you actually synthesize the evolutionary biology, the radical genetics, and, well, the massive cultural footprint of the apple tree, which is Malus domestica, the entire premise of what we are dealing with fundamentally shifts.
Right.
We aren't just talking about agriculture today. We're talking about this ancient evolutionary technology that humans stumbled upon, hijacked, and eventually used to build the foundational infrastructure of civilization itself.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission for this deep dive is to completely dismantle the way you see this fruit. And I want to jump straight into that phrase you just used.
Evolutionary technology.
Yes, because when I bite into a Honeycrisp, I'm certainly not thinking about, like, Ice Age ecosystems. So let's ground ourselves here. Where are we, biologically speaking, when we hold an apple?
So to understand the apple's architecture, you first have to zoom out. You have to locate it on the broader tree of life.
Okay.
The apple belongs to the Rosaceae family, and that means the apple tree is a direct biological cousin to the rose.
Wait, really? The rose?
Yeah, but it doesn't stop there. It's this massive, highly successful botanical family. It also includes pears, cherries, peaches, plums, hawthorns, and even almonds.
Wow, okay, that immediately recontextualizes things for me. Because if I'm eating a cousin of a rose, I start looking for the family resemblance.
Right.
But where do we actually see that connection? Because, I mean, a thorny rose bush and an apple tree don't exactly look like twins.
You see it most clearly in the spring, actually. If you've ever looked closely at an apple blossom, with those delicate white and pink petals, you'll notice there are always exactly 5 petals.
Oh, interesting.
And they're arranged in a very specific radial symmetry. That 5-petaled structure is the absolute classic signature of a wild rose blossom.
I never noticed that.
Yeah, and the reproductive organs inside the flower, like the cluster of stamens right in the center, are nearly identical in their fundamental design. The family relationship is written right there in the floral geometry.
That is so cool. But obviously, a rose produces this tiny, dry little hip, right? And an apple tree produces something that weighs half a pound and is just packed with sugar and juice.
Right, a massive difference in the final product.
So where did this specific giant fruit-bearing branch of the family actually begin its journey? Like, when did it split off?
Well, the evolutionary origins of the Malus genus, which are the true apples, take us deep into the Cenozoic era, specifically during the Miocene epoch.
Okay, and how long ago are we talking?
We are talking roughly 5 to 25 million years ago. And to picture this, you kind of have to imagine an Earth in the middle of a massive climate transition.
What kind of transition?
So for millions of years prior, the planet had been a relatively warm tropical greenhouse, just very stable. But during the Miocene, the global thermostat started turning down. Polar ice caps were expanding.
Okay.
And as the planet cooled, that gentle, uniform climate began to fracture into intense seasonal contrasts.
Right, so I'm trying to picture the environment here. We are moving from year-round warmth to environments where you actually have, like, a brutal freezing winter followed by a hot summer.
Precisely. And that is exactly the kind of environment that acts as an evolutionary crucible.
Meaning it forces adaptation.
Exactly. This increasing seasonality heavily favored deciduous trees. Because if you are a plant and the water in the ground is going to freeze solid for 4 months, keeping your leaves is a death sentence.
Because the leaves would just freeze.
Yeah, the water inside the delicate leaf tissue would freeze, crystallize, and completely shred the cells. So trees evolved to drop their leaves, shut down their vascular systems, and enter a state of deep winter dormancy.
And then they just wake back up.
Right, they rapidly explode with new growth the second the spring thaw arrives.
Okay, so the apple was one of these survivors that figured out the deciduous trick. But where exactly on the map is this happening? Where is the original staging ground for the apple?
The ancestral homeland is this very specific geographic pocket in Central Asia. It's the Tian Shan mountain range, which literally translates to the mountains of heaven.
The mountains of heaven. That sounds so mythic.
It does. And this range acts as a massive geological spine stretching across modern-day Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Western China.
Okay, so right in the heart of Central Asia.
Exactly. And even today, if you trek into the valleys of the Tian Shan, you will find vast, incredibly biodiverse forests of the apple's primary wild ancestor. It's a tree called Malus sieversii.
Just huge forests of wild apples.
Yes. These forests are basically the primordial soup of the modern apple.
I am fascinated by the idea of a wild apple forest just thriving in the mountains of Kazakhstan,
Yeah.
long before humans even, knew how to make a fire.
It's an amazing image.
But this raises a massive logical question for me. If humans weren't around 20 million years ago to cultivate these orchards, who or what was the apple actually evolving for?
That is the pivotal biological reality of any fruit, really. We have this very human-centric arrogance that all the sweet things in the world are just here to delight us.
Right, like they exist for our lunchboxes.
Exactly. But biologically speaking, the apple didn't evolve its characteristics to please a human palate. To understand what an apple is, we really have to look at its botanical structure.
Okay.
The apple is what botanists classify as a pome.
A poem. Okay, break down the anatomy of that for us. Because, like, when I eat a peach, I know I'm eating the fleshy wall of the ovary that surrounds a single hard seed.
Right.
Is an apple different from that?
It is very different. The edible flesh of the apple, the crisp, juicy part you actually bite into, is not technically the ovary.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it is a swollen piece of stem tissue called the receptacle, or the hypanthium.
Stem tissue.
Exactly. When the apple blossom is fertilized, the tissue at the very base of the flower radically expands. It swells up to completely swallow and surround the actual ovary.
Okay.
And that ovary becomes the papery core that contains the seeds.
Wait, my mind is slightly blown here. You're telling me that when I eat an apple, I am essentially eating a massively mutated, waterlogged flower stem.
Botanically, yes, you are. It is an accessory tissue.
That's bizarre.
It is. And the reason the tree expends an enormous amount of metabolic energy to swell that stem, pump it full of water, pack it with complex sugars, and paint its skin with those vibrant reds and yellows, it's pure manipulation.
Manipulation.
Yes. These traits are biological advertisements. They are literally an evolutionary bribe.
Okay, explain that.
Well, the tree is stationary, right? It cannot move. So it manufactures a delicious, high-calorie package to persuade a mobile organism to come along, eat the package, and carry the seeds inside, far away from the parent tree.
Wow. So it's not just a billboard. It's like a prepaid shipping label.
That is a perfect way to put it.
The tree is paying a delivery fee in the form of sugar.
Yes.
But back in the Miocene, if humans weren't the delivery drivers, who was the target demographic for an advertisement this large and this heavy?
Good question.
Because, a bird can eat a berry, but a bird is not flying away with a half-pound wild apple.
And this is where the story connects to the megafauna of the Ice Age. The wild apples of Malus sieversii evolved their unusually large size precisely because they were co-evolving with massive herbivores.
Oh, wow.
We are talking about ancient, gigantic bears, extinct ancestral horses, giant deer, and even massive pachyderms like mastodons.
I am trying to visualize a mastodon casually grazing in an apple orchard. That is insane. How does the biological machinery of that relationship actually function?
Well, think about the mechanics of seed dispersal from the tree's perspective. If an apple just falls to the ground and rots, the seeds germinate directly under the canopy of the parent tree.
Right, which isn't good.
Exactly. They will be starved for sunlight, competing for the exact same soil nutrients, and highly vulnerable to localized diseases. The tree needs its offspring to emigrate.
It needs them to get out of town.
Right. So now picture a massive Ice Age bear. It needs thousands of calories to prepare for winter hibernation, which perfectly coincides with the autumn ripening of the fruit.
Okay, I see where this is going.
The bear wanders into the forest, sees the bright red and yellow colors contrasting against the green foliage, smells the volatile compounds we recognize as that classic apple aroma, and just devours the fruit whole.
And crucially, it doesn't spit out the core like we do.
Yeah.
The bear just swallows the whole thing, seeds and all.
Exactly the point. The seeds are protected by this tough, leathery outer coat, so they pass entirely intact through the bear's digestive tract.
Incredible.
And while the bear is digesting the sweet flesh, it might walk 10, 20, or even 30 miles across the landscape.
Doing the delivery work.
Yes. Eventually, it deposits those seeds in a massive pile of nutrient-rich dung. So the tree has successfully transported its offspring miles away, planted them in a perfect mound of organic fertilizer, and the digestive acids of the bear have actually weakened the seed coat.
Oh, which helps it grow.
Yes, it's a process called scarification, which helps the seed germinate much faster in the spring.
The elegance of that system is staggering. So
Yeah.
when I go to the supermarket and I'm staring at a massive bin of Gallus or Fuji's, the fundamental architecture of what I'm looking at, like the size, the crunch, the sugar content, that entire package is an echo of an extinct world.
It absolutely is.
It is literal megafauna bait.
It is an artifact of a lost ecological partnership. Humans eventually migrated through those mountains, noticed this incredibly effective, storable, calorie-dense food source, and we essentially took over the distribution contract from the bears.
We stole their job.
Pretty much. The bears did the heavy lifting for millions of years,
Yeah.
and we hijacked the final product.
But okay, if the apple was so perfectly engineered for giant bears and mastodons to scatter its seeds across the Eurasian steppes, how did humans actually manage to hijack it?
Yeah.
Because from looking at our sources, it wasn't just a matter of us walking through the woods picking wild fruit.
Right, there's more to it.
To build the global agricultural empires we have today, we had to overcome this deeply bizarre genetic quirk hidden right inside the core of the fruit.
Yeah, the genetics of the apple tree represent one of the most fascinating paradoxes in all of botany. To really understand human cultivation of the apple, you have to understand that apples do not grow true from seed.
Okay, let's pause and really dig into the mechanics of that, because that violates almost everything we are taught about basic agriculture.
It really does.
Like if I save the seeds from a particularly delicious tomato in my garden and I plant them the next spring, I am going to get a tomato plant that produces roughly the exact same type of tomato, right? You were saying the apple completely rejects that logic.
The apple thoroughly rejects it. In botanical genetics, apples are what we call extreme heterozygotes.
Extreme heterozygotes.
Yeah. To break that down without getting too bogged down in jargon, it basically means their genetic makeup is incredibly unstable and diverse.
Okay.
The apple tree actually has a biological mechanism built into its flowers that strongly rejects its own pollen. It is self-incompatible.
Meaning it can't fertilize itself.
Right. To produce a fruit, an apple blossom almost always requires pollen delivered by an insect from a genetically different apple tree nearby.
Okay, so the mother tree provides the ovary, but the father tree could be any other apple tree within like a 2-mile radius that a bee happened to visit first.
Exactly. And because of this mandatory cross-pollination, the chromosomes shuffle in wildly unpredictable ways. Every single apple seed is a completely unique genetic lottery ticket.
Wow.
If you eat a perfectly crisp, sweet Honeycrisp apple, you might find 5 or 6 dark brown seeds inside the core, right?
Sure.
Well, if you take those exact seeds and plant them in the ground, absolutely none of the resulting trees will grow Honeycrisp apples.
Wait, none of them.
Not a single one.
So I am essentially planting 5 distinct siblings, and just like human siblings, they're going to have completely different traits.
Much more different than human siblings. The variation in apples is just staggering. Out of those 5 seeds, one tree might produce fruit the size of a golf ball that is so bitter and astringent it turns your mouth inside out.
Oh, gross.
Right. The next tree might produce a mushy, starchy yellow fruit. The third might take 15 years to even produce a blossom.
Really? That long?
Yes. The odds of a single seed randomly producing a fruit with the perfect balance of sugar, acid, crunch, and durability that humans desire are astronomically low. It is roughly a 1 in 10,000 chance.
That is insane, which raises an incredible question about evolutionary strategy. Why on earth would a species evolve to be so genetically chaotic?
It's all about survival.
But what is the advantage of never repeating yourself?
Well, remember the Ice Age environment we discussed?
Yeah.
Advancing and retreating glaciers, wild swings in temperature, new pathogens evolving constantly.
Right. Very unstable.
Exactly. If a forest of trees is genetically identical, a single new fungus or a sudden drop in regional temperatures could wipe out the entire population in one single generation.
Because they all share the exact same weakness.
Precisely. By forcing extreme heterozygosity, by making sure every single offspring is a complete wild card, The apple tree guaranteed that no matter what the environment did, at least a few individuals in the next generation would randomly possess the genetic traits needed to survive.
So the chaos is literally a defense mechanism.
The chaos is the point.
Wow. But that brings us to the human problem.
Yeah.
Because if I am an ancient farmer and I find one single magical tree in the forest that produces massive, sweet, perfect apples, I want an entire orchard of that exact tree.
Naturally.
But if I planted seeds, I get a forest of unpredictable, mostly terrible crab apples.
So how did human beings solve the genetic roulette wheel? Like, how do we have grocery stores filled with identical Granny Smiths today?
The solution is that we stopped planting seeds. We bypassed sexual reproduction entirely, and we moved to cloning.
Cloning.
Yeah. Because the seeds are unreliable, the absolute only way to perfectly preserve and multiply a specific apple variety is through a physical surgical process called grafting. Okay, I really want to understand the physical reality of grafting. Because if I cut my finger, my body regenerates the tissue and heals the cut, right?
Right.
But if I were to somehow detach my arm and take someone else's arm to my shoulder, my immune system would aggressively attack and reject the foreign tissue.
It definitely would.
So how does a tree survive having a piece of another tree surgically attached to it?
The magic of grafting relies on a microscopic layer of tissue inside the tree called the vascular cambium.
The vascular cambium.
Yes. If you peel back the bark of an apple tree, right beneath it, right before you hit the hard inner wood, there is this incredibly thin, slippery layer of actively dividing cells. This is the cambium.
Yeah.
It is the only part of the trunk that is actually growing new cells.
So it's basically like a layer of stem cells that can turn into whatever the tree needs.
That is a perfect analogy. So to graft a tree, a farmer takes a small branch or even just a single bud, and this piece is called the scion from the specific tree they want to clone, let's say our Honeycrisp.
Right, the sign.
Then they take a young, sturdy apple tree grown from any random seed to act as the base. This is the rootstock.
Okay, so you have the good fruit branch and the sturdy root base.
Exactly. The farmer then makes a very precise geometric cut into the wood of both the scion and the rootstock.
Like puzzle pieces.
Yes. And the critical step is that you must align the cambium layer of the scion perfectly with the cambium layer of the rootstock. You bind them tightly together with tape or wax to keep out the air and pathogens.
Wait, so if the cambium layers don't line up perfectly, does the branch just bleed out and die?
It will completely fail. The two circulatory systems must physically touch. But if they do, the undifferentiated cells in the cambium of both pieces begin to multiply. They create a mass of healing tissue called a callus. As this callus forms, it bridges the gap. The xylem tissues, which pull water and minerals up from the roots, fuse together. The phloem tissues, which push sugars down from the leaves, fuse together.
That is incredible.
The two trees literally heal into a single functioning organism.
That is absolutely staggering. You are Frankensteining the root system of one tree to the upper canopy of another tree.
That's exactly what you're doing.
And so what grows above the graft line?
Everything that grows above that surgical scar will be an exact genetic clone of the original scion. The rootstock provides the water and anchors the tree, but it has zero influence on the genetics of the fruit itself.
This completely changes the way I view an orchard. It means the discovery of grafting didn't just alter agriculture, it permanently altered the evolutionary trajectory of the species.
It did. The philosophical contradiction here is profound. You have a species, the apple, whose entire evolutionary identity was based on wild genetic chaos.
Right.
Its survival relied on never, ever repeating itself. And yet humans invented a physical surgery to hit the pause button on that evolution. We captured the apple and forced it into a civilization of replicated individuals.
A civilization of replicated individuals. That is so eerie. Let's make that concrete for the listener. Let's trace a specific apple. Tell me the story of the Granny Smith.
Oh, the Granny Smith is the perfect illustration of this cloning process. The very first Granny Smith was a completely random genetic mutation, just one lucky roll of the genetic roulette wheel.
Just a total fluke.
A total fluke. It was discovered in Australia in 1868 by an older woman named Maria Ann Smith. She had actually tossed some French crabapple cores into a compost pile near a creek on her property.
And it just grew.
Yeah, a seedling sprouted, and when it finally bore fruit years later, she noticed the apples were bright green, incredibly tart, crisp, and possessed this astonishing ability to remain fresh in storage for months.
So she recognized that she had just won the lottery.
She did.
But the only way to share that lottery ticket was to clone it, right?
Yes. Local orchardists came and took cutting scions from that one specific tree in Marie Ann Smith's yard and grafted them onto their own rootstocks. Then other farmers took cuttings from those new branches and so on. Every single Granny Smith apple you buy in a store today, whether you are in Tokyo, New York, or London, is growing on a branch that was grafted from a branch, that was grafted from a branch tracing all the way back in an unbroken physical chain of living wood to that one single tree growing in a compost pile in Australia in 1868.
Oh my God. It's a living antique.
It really is.
When I eat a Granny Smith, I am not just eating a piece of fruit, I am interacting with a biological ghost.
You are.
I am eating the exact flesh engineered by a Victorian-era organism that has just been copy-pasted across the globe for 150 years.
You are eating a member of an immortal clone army. When you walk into a modern commercial orchard, you are not looking at a forest of unique individuals. You are looking at a highly engineered, globally standardized, genetically frozen space.
That is just, wow.
But the human discovery of grafting didn't just freeze the apple's genetics in time. It gave the apple a passport, essentially.
Because once we realized we could surgically clone our absolute favorite apples and guarantee they would taste exactly the way we wanted, we didn't just leave them in the garden. We packed them up and we started walking.
We took them everywhere.
And that brings us to the geography of the apple. How did this mountain fruit conquer the world?
Well, the apple tree is fundamentally a Silk Road organism. The Silk Road wasn't just a trade route for spices and silk, it was a massive biological corridor.
Right.
As merchants, armies, diplomats, and nomadic tribes moved back and forth across the vast expanses of Eurasia, the apple moved right along with them.
But what does that actually look like on the ground? Like, how do you transport a forest across a continent?
It happened in multiple ways, actually. Travelers carried dried apples in their saddlebags for sustenance, tossing the cores by the wayside at oases and campsites.
Which planted seeds.
Exactly, which inadvertently planted new seedling forests along the trade routes. But more deliberately, skilled orchardists traveling with caravans carried dormant scion wood, usually wrapped in damp moss or cloth, specifically to graft their favorite varieties onto wild trees they encountered hundreds of miles from home.
So they are actively terraforming the trade road as they travel.
Yes.
And as the apple travels westward out of the mountains of Kazakhstan toward Europe, it's going to encounter other native plants. It doesn't just stay isolated.
This is a crucial piece of the genetic puzzle. As the cultivated Central Asian apples moved west, they continuously cross-pollinated and hybridized with other wild relative species they encountered along the way.
Like what?
The most significant of these was the European wild crabapple, Malus sylvestris.
What did the European crabapple bring to the table? Because if the Kazakhstan apples were already big and sweet, why mix them?
So the pure Central Asian apple was sweet and large, but it lacked certain complexities. When it hybridized with Malus sylvestris, it absorbed genes that provided sharper acidity, higher tannin levels, and crucially, an extended storage life.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, this continuous genetic mixing across the Silk Road over thousands of years is what gave us the incredibly complex, robust, hybrid lineage of the modern domesticated apple. It is a mutt of the highest order.
But I keep coming back to the question of why. Why did humanity decide that this specific fruit, out of all the fruits in the world, was the ultimate hitchhiker?
Well,
Because, you don't see massive global empires built around the cultivation of the plum or the apricot in the same way. What made the apple the foundational crop for human expansion?
the apple solved multiple critical civilizational problems simultaneously. It really comes down to utility.
Okay, what kind of utility?
First, as the genetics improved, the apple became a miracle of preservation. In an era long before refrigeration, a harvested apple with a thick skin kept in a cool, dark root cellar could last for 6 to 8 months.
Wow, half a year.
Yes. It provided a vital, reliable source of calories, sugar, and vitamin C right through the dead of winter when absolutely nothing else was growing.
It's essentially a natural canned good.
Precisely. Second, it transports beautifully. I mean, a peach will bruise if you look at it wrong. A berry will crush and mold in a day.
So true.
But an apple has a durable skin and a firm, dense cellular structure that allows it to be packed into barrels, loaded onto wooden carts, or stuffed into saddlebags and survive weeks of rough travel.
Right.
But the third reason, and historically perhaps the most important reason for its rapid expansion across frontiers, is its relationship with yeast. It ferments easily.
Okay, we need to spend some time here because when we talk about apples in early societies, especially colonial American societies or frontier settlements,
Hmm.
we aren't just talking about people wanting a healthy afternoon snack to keep the doctor away.
Not at all.
We are talking about basic survival and hydration.
Exactly. It is incredibly difficult for modern people who have access to treated tap water to grasp how dangerous water historically was.
Right, water was deadly.
Before the advent of modern microbiology, municipal water treatment, and a real understanding of waterborne pathogens like cholera or dysentery, drinking standing water or even river water near a settlement was a massive gamble with your life. It was heavily contaminated with bacteria.
So you have settlers moving into new territories.
Yeah.
And they are essentially dying of thirst next to a river because the water is toxic. How does the apple solve this?
The apple solves it through fermentation. If you crush apples and press out the juice, the natural wild yeast present on the skin of the fruit immediately begin consuming the sugars in the juice and converting them into alcohol.
Okay.
The resulting beverage is hard cider, and the alcohol content, combined with the natural acidity of the apple juice, creates an environment completely hostile to harmful bacteria.
The yeast basically outcompetes the deadly pathogens.
Yes.
So the alcohol isn't just for recreation, it's literally a sanitation mechanism.
It was foundational infrastructure. For much of human history, especially in colonial America and early Europe, hard cider was the default daily beverage. It was safer to drink than water.
Wow.
It was consumed by adults, and in weaker, watered-down forms, it was consumed by children at every single meal. It was a primary source of hydration and caloric energy for manual laborers.
Which completely reframes one of the most misunderstood figures in American history for me. I really want to talk about Johnny Appleseed.
John Chapman.
Yes, John Chapman. Because the myth we are all spoon-fed in elementary school is that he was this barefoot, benevolent, vaguely saint-like figure wandering the untamed wilderness, the tin pot on his head, scattering seeds so that hungry pioneers could have nice, sweet dessert apples.
The Disney version.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the historical reality of John Chapman is much more raw, and is entirely tied to the economics of alcohol, isn't it?
It is. The historical John Chapman was a brilliant, eccentric, and incredibly shrewd frontier nurseryman and land developer.
Land developer.
Yes. And the key detail that dismantles the myth is his methodology. Chapman was strictly planting apples from seed. He famously refused to practice grafting, believing it to be an unnatural interference.
And as we established earlier, planting an apple from a seed is a genetic roulette wheel.
Exactly. Which means the millions of trees John Chapman planted across Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois were not producing sweet-eating apples.
Because the odds are 1 in 10,000.
Right. They were producing wild, unpredictable, mostly small, bitter, astringent fruit. In the terminology of the time, they were called spitters. Because if you bit into one, you immediately spat it out.
So why spend your entire life planting millions of trees that produce terrible fruit? That makes no sense.
Because spitters are absolutely perfect for pressing into hard cider. The bitterness and high tannins that make them awful to eat fresh actually give hard cider its complex flavor structure and preservative qualities.
Oh, wow.
Chapman wasn't building dessert orchards. He was building a massive, decentralized, fermented alcohol infrastructure ahead of the wave of westward expansion.
He was literally laying down the hydration grid for the frontier.
He was, and he was also exploiting frontier land laws.
How so?
Well, in many territories, land companies, like the Ohio Company of Associates, required settlers to prove they were establishing a permanent homestead before they could secure the deed to a parcel of land.
Okay.
And one of the primary ways to prove permanent improvement was to plant an orchard of at least 50 apple or pear trees.
Let me guess. Chapman knew this.
He definitely knew this. So Chapman is traveling ahead of the pioneer wagons, finding fertile plots of land along rivers, clearing them, planting thousands of seeds, and fencing them off.
Right.
By the time the settlers arrive a few years later, needing trees to fulfill their legal land claims and needing a source of safe hydration, Chapman is sitting there with a massive inventory of ready-to-sell cider saplings.
That is brilliant. The American frontier was, quite literally, secured and hydrated by the bitter offspring of the apple.
It really was.
That is a staggering shift in perspective. But it wasn't just the fruit or the fermented juice that wove the apple into the fabric of daily life, right?
No, it wasn't.
The wood of the tree itself played a crucial role, but not in the grand, sweeping way that we usually think of important timber.
That's a very vital distinction to make. When we look at the physical properties of applewood, it is incredibly dense. Its density ranges from roughly 700 to 800 kilograms per cubic meter.
That sounds heavy.
It is hard, heavy, and has a very fine, tight grain. But despite its strength, the biology of the tree limits its use. Apple trees are relatively small, and their trunks tend to twist, knot, and lean as they grow to chase the sunlight.
Right, so you were never going to build a massive, straight architectural beam out of an apple tree.
No, never.
If you're an empire, you aren't building heavily armed naval galleons out of twisted applewood. You need towering oak or tall, straight pine or massive cedar for that.
Exactly. Applewood completely lacks the grand scale and the extreme natural rot resistance required for shipbuilding or monumental architecture. It is not the timber of kings.
Okay.
Instead, its extreme hardness was utilized on a much smaller, intensely practical scale. Because the wood doesn't splinter easily, it was highly prized for making tool handles.
Oh, interesting.
It was used for mallets, chisels, hand-carved bowls, spoons, the teeth of wooden gears in mills, and small specialty furniture.
It's the wood of the hand.
Yes. And beyond its mechanical uses, it had an incredibly important chemical use in the kitchen.
Cooking.
When applewood burns, it burns intensely hot, and it releases a specific profile of volatile organic compounds that produces a sweet, mild, fruity smoke.
For smoking meat.
Exactly. Before refrigeration, smoking meat was one of the primary ways to preserve protein for the winter. Applewood was widely considered the premium wood for smoking pork and poultry because it imparted preservation without a harsh, bitter soot.
So the apple tree is providing the drink in your cup, the handle of the hammer in your hand, and the smoke that flavors the bacon, keeping your family alive through February.
It provided almost everything.
It is not the wood of the empire. It is the wood of the household. It is deeply intimate.
Very intimate.
And that intimacy extends to the sociological impact of the orchard itself. Because planting an orchard fundamentally changes the psychology of the human beings who tend it.
Profoundly so. An orchard is a uniquely demanding, managed ecosystem. It requires a specific psychological shift from the people who plant it.
Yeah.
It forces the concept of delayed gratification onto a society. Think about it. If you plant a field of wheat or corn, you are operating on a seasonal timeline. You sow in the spring, you harvest in the autumn, and if the land fails, you can pack up and move the next year.
But an apple tree operates on a generational timeline.
Exactly. When you graft and plant an apple tree, it takes anywhere from 3 to 10 years of constant pruning, protection from deer, and soil management before it begins producing a commercially meaningful harvest.
10 years of waiting.
Yes. When you plant an orchard, you are committing to a long-term conversation with the physical landscape. You are deciding to create permanence.
You are tying yourself to a specific grid of coordinates. You're standing in a field and saying, I am going to be here in a decade to pick this fruit. My children are going to be here in 30 years to press this cider.
And therefore, the apple orchard becomes inextricably tied to the human concepts of land ownership, domestic settlement, family lineage, and inheritance.
It grounds us.
The orchard civilizes the landscape, making it productive and ordered, but in return, it domesticates the humans. It forces us to stay put. It forces us to observe the long, slow discipline of the seasons.
And because the apple became so deeply, intimately embedded in the domestic lives of humans, growing right outside the kitchen window, providing the daily drink, giving us the tools for our hands, it naturally seeped into our stories.
It had to.
It couldn't just remain a botanical specimen. It took on a heavy, immense symbolic weight that honestly no other food on Earth carries.
It is arguably the most symbolically dense living organism in human civilization. Very few plants have accumulated so many overlapping and often contradictory meanings across religion, mythology, philosophy, and folklore.
Yeah.
And what is so striking when you analyze these stories is how consistently human beings map their own deep anxieties, desires, and flaws onto the physical traits of this one specific fruit.
Let's start with the biggest one, the undisputed heavyweight champion of apple mythology,
Yeah,
the Garden of Eden.
right.
The fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. To billions of people, the apple is the catalyst for the fall of humanity. But there is a massive historical and linguistic asterisk here from our sources that we have to talk about.
It is perhaps the most consequential mistranslation, or rather deliberate artistic interpretation in literary history.
Mistranslation.
Yeah. If you read the book of Genesis in the original Hebrew, the text never explicitly names the forbidden fruit. It uses the generic Hebrew word peri, which simply means fruit.
Just fruit.
Right. It could have been a fig, a pomegranate, a grape, or something entirely mythical that doesn't even exist.
So how did the apple get the blame for original sin?
The transformation happened during the translation of the Bible into Latin in the late 4th century by a scholar named Jerome. This translation became known as the Vulgate.
Okay, Jerome.
Jerome encountered a linguistic coincidence that was simply too good to pass up. In Latin, the noun malum means apple, and the adjective malus means evil or wicked.
Oh, that is fascinating. It's a linguistic pun.
It is literally a theological pun embedded directly into the text. By translating the generic fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil into the Latin associated with the apple, he fused the concepts together forever.
Wow.
And as the story moved into medieval Europe, and specifically as European Christian artists during the Renaissance began to paint and sculpt the scene of the fall, they needed a visual shorthand for this abstract concept of temptation.
They needed something recognizable to paint.
Exactly. They capitalized on the Latin pun and transformed the anonymous fruit into a recognizable bright red apple.
And by putting a red apple in the hand of Eve in thousands of paintings across Europe, they permanently burdened this specific fruit with the concepts of temptation, moral consciousness, and the loss of innocence.
The apple became the ultimate physical symbol of forbidden knowledge. In this symbolic framework, the act of eating the apple represents crossing a psychological threshold.
Right.
It is the moment humanity leaves the blissful ignorance of an animalistic paradise behind, becomes agonizingly self-aware, realizes they are naked, and faces the heavy consequences of intelligence and free will.
Which is an incredibly heavy burden for a piece of fruit to carry.
It really is.
But it's not just the Abrahamic traditions that obsessed over it. The ancient Greeks had their own intense, dramatic relationship with the apple.
In Greek mythology, the apple frequently serves as an object that represents destructive desire, vanity, and divine rivalry. The most consequential example is the myth of the golden apple of discord, which actually leads to the judgment of Paris.
Okay, set the scene for us. What happens at this divine banquet?
So, Eris, the goddess of discord, is furious that she was not invited to a major wedding banquet among the gods. In retaliation, she crashes the party and tosses a solid golden apple right into the center of the room.
Very traumatic.
Very. And carved into the gold is a single phrase, "For the fairest." Instantly, a massive rivalry erupts between three of the most powerful goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Each claims the apple belongs to me.
Which is a brilliant trap. Eris basically rolls a grenade of vanity into the room.
Exactly, and they demand that a mortal, a Trojan prince named Paris, judge who is the most beautiful. Aphrodite bribes Paris by promising him the love of the most beautiful mortal woman in the world, Helen of Sparta.
Ah, Helen of Troy.
Right. Paris awards the apple to Aphrodite, claims Helen, and takes her back to Troy.
Which, if you know your Greek history, is the inciting incident that sparks the Trojan War. The city burns, heroes die, and empires fall.
The golden apple in that myth is a profound symbol of the butterfly effect of human desire. It represents a tiny, beautiful, seemingly harmless object of desire that triggers unimaginable catastrophe.
It symbolizes how small, vain choices cause civilization-scale consequences.
In the Greek mind, the apple is beauty that destroys.
But if we travel further north, into the cold climates of Norse mythology, the apple flips the script entirely. It's no longer about destruction or sin. It's about desperate survival.
Yes, the climate dictates the myth here. In Norse mythology, you have the goddess Idun. She is the keeper of an ash box filled with magical apples.
Okay.
The Norse gods are not naturally immortal. They are actually subject to aging and decay. They rely entirely on Idun's apples to grant them eternal youth. They must consume this fruit to stave off mortality.
Wow, they literally have to eat it to stay young.
Yes, there is a central myth where a giant kidnaps Idun and steals her away from Asgard. And without her apples, the mighty gods quickly begin to wither, their hair turns gray, their skin wrinkles, and their power just fades.
The panic of realizing your immortality is tied to a fragile food source. Here, the apple becomes a symbol of absolute renewal, anti-aging, and humanity's desperate, grasping wish to defeat time.
Exactly. And if we look at Celtic folklore, the apple shifts into an even more mystical, liminal space. Orchards are consistently depicted as the threshold between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead.
Like a portal.
Sort of. Think of the mythical island of Avalon, the sanctuary where a mortally wounded King Arthur is taken to heal.
Avalon. I've heard the name a million times, but I've never connected it to apples.
The name itself is believed to derive from the Old Welsh word afal, meaning apple. Geoffrey of Monmouth literally referred to it in Latin as Insula Pomorum, the Isle of Apples.
The Isle of Apples.
In Celtic traditions, the apple branch, particularly one carrying silver bells, is a passport. It is a doorway between worlds, a place of deep feminine magic, healing, and access to the other world.
And we absolutely cannot talk about apple mythology without addressing European fairy tales. Specifically, the one that Walt Disney cemented into the modern global consciousness, Snow White.
Snow White presents perhaps the most potent visual distillation of the apple's duality. The evil queen uses dark magic to create a poisoned apple. But the danger isn't obvious. The apple is described as stunningly beautiful, vibrant red, perfectly glossy, incredibly appetizing.
It is designed to bypass logic through sheer visual appeal.
It is the ultimate symbol of poisoned beauty. It represents deceptive temptation, something that looks incredibly nourishing, vibrant, and life-giving on the outside, but contains deadly ruin hidden just beneath the skin. It preys on the innocent desire for sweetness.
When you synthesize all of this, it is genuinely wild. Because you have Eden, where the apple equals forbidden knowledge and the burden of consciousness.
Right.
You have Greece, where the apple equals destructive, vain desire. You have the Norse, where the apple equals eternal life. You have the Celts, where it is a magical doorway. And you have Snow White, where it equals hidden danger.
When you map all these narratives together, a very clear psychological pattern emerges. The apple consistently acts as a mirror for humanity's impossible wishes. It represents the agonizing tension between what we desperately desire and the terrifying consequences of actually obtaining it. The apple is both deeply comforting. Think of the warm nostalgia of American apple pie, autumn harvest festivals, and domestic security. And it is utterly terrifying, representing sin, death, vanity, and the collapse of empires.
It's an interface, a button you press that permanently changes your reality. And honestly, considering all of this mythological baggage, is it any wonder that the most famous, valuable technology company in the modern world chose this specific fruit as its logo?
It makes perfect sense.
Think about Apple Inc. We are talking about the pioneers who put personal computers on our desks and smartphones in our pockets. They needed a corporate symbol for the dawn of the information age, for a glowing machine that grants you access to infinite data.
Right.
So what did they choose? A fruit universally associated with knowledge, awakening, and curiosity. They chose the fruit of Eden.
It's brilliant branding.
To me, that doesn't feel like a marketing coincidence. It feels mythologically inevitable. To eat the apple, to open the laptop lid, to swipe the glass screen, is to sign the ultimate terms and conditions of becoming a modern human. You get the infinite knowledge, you get the godlike power of connection, but you can never, ever go back to the quiet innocence of the garden.
That is a stunning modern translation of the myth, because the apple truly is the fruit of knowledge. But the tragic irony of our time is that our modern industrialized knowledge, our advanced technology, our obsession with global supply chains, our relentless drive for infinite economic efficiency has pushed the biological limits of the actual physical apple tree to the absolute breaking point.
Which brings us crashing into the present day. We have taken this ancient mythic tree, a tree that evolved alongside mastodons and hitched a ride on the Silk Road, and we have fed it into the crushing machinery of global capitalism.
We have.
What does the Anthropocene orchard actually look like? Because the numbers we found in our sources regarding the sheer scale of production are difficult to comprehend.
The scale is immense, and it is a marvel of human logistics. Today, global commercial apple production exceeds 80 million metric tons annually.
80 million metric tons.
It is a massive economic engine. The apple isn't just sold fresh. It supports vast secondary industries like juice concentrate, baby food, pectin for commercial banking, and extracts for cosmetics.
Right.
And currently, this massive global industry is heavily dominated by China, which produces more apples, particularly on the lowest plateau, than the rest of the world combined by a massive margin.
But to achieve that kind of staggering industrial scale, we had to fundamentally alter how the apple lives, right?
We did.
We couldn't rely on chaotic, wild genetics or small, diverse family orchards. There's a massive biological cost to this level of industrial efficiency.
The cost is extreme genetic vulnerability and ecological fragility. To feed a global supply chain, commercial agriculture couldn't afford variety. They needed predictability.
Right, the supply chain demands it.
They aggressively selected for a very narrow set of traits. They needed apples that looked perfectly uniform and red on a supermarket shelf. They needed apples that were incredibly sweet to satisfy modern sugar addictions.
Yeah.
And most importantly, they needed apples with extreme shipping durability fruit, with skin thick enough to bounce around in a truck, and flesh dense enough to sit in atmospheric cold storage for 12 months without turning to mush.
And when an entire industry selects for only those 3 or 4 specific commercial traits, you inevitably leave everything else, like complex flavor, disease resistance, environmental adaptability behind.
Precisely. This relentless drive for standardized efficiency wiped out thousands of traditional heirloom varieties that used to thrive in local microclimates.
Just gone.
We replaced diverse orchards with vast, endless monocultures. We have millions of acres planted with genetically identical clones of just a handful of commercially viable varieties, like the Gala, the Fuji, or the Red Delicious.
Explain the danger of a monoculture to someone who isn't an agricultural scientist. Why is it a problem if every tree is a clone of a Gala?
Biologically speaking, monocultures are incredibly fragile. In a wild forest, genetic diversity acts as a firewall. If a new fungus attacks, it might kill a few trees, but others will have a natural genetic immunity and the forest survives.
Because they're all different.
Right. But in a cloned monoculture, every single tree has the exact same immune system. They share the same identical weaknesses.
Oh, that's bad.
So if a fungal disease like apple scab or a devastating bacterial infection like fire blight figures out how to breach the defenses of one Gala tree, it has figured out how to breach millions of them.
It just sweeps through.
A pathogen can devastate an entire region's harvest in a matter of weeks. The only way we currently keep these cloned armies alive is through a massive, continuous chemical intervention of fungicides and antibiotics.
But it isn't just pathogens that threaten the clone army. The tree itself is incredibly sensitive to the weather, specifically the cold. And as anyone paying attention knows, the global climate is currently going haywire.
This is why the commercial apple orchard is currently acting as a highly sensitive, tragic, early warning system for climate change. We have to go back to the apple's evolutionary roots in the harsh winters of the Tian Shan Mountains.
Right, the cold.
Apple trees evolved to require a specific, sustained period of winter dormancy to survive. Most commercial varieties need what botanists call chill hours.
How does a chill hour actually work inside the biology of the tree?
A chill hour is an hour where the ambient temperature remains consistently between roughly 0 and 7 degrees Celsius, or 32 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay.
The tree uses this period of deep cold as a biological reset button. When the cold hits, the tree produces a hormone called abscisic acid, which acts like a lock, keeping the buds tightly closed and dormant so they don't freeze and die.
It keeps them asleep.
Exactly. The tree typically needs between 500 and 1,500 of these chill hours to slowly break down that hormone. Once the required hours are met and the temperature warms up in the spring, a different hormone, gibberellin, takes over, telling the tree to wake up, push out its leaves, and bloom.
It's an internal clock, calibrated to the exact rhythms of a stable Holocene climate. But as global winters get warmer and more erratic, that internal clock is getting completely scrambled.
The disruption is devastating. Warmer, shorter winters mean the tree might not get enough chill hours to bloom evenly.
Or they bloom too early.
Or even worse, the tree experiences an unseasonably warm spell in February. The tree's confused internal chemistry mistakenly thinks spring has arrived. It pushes out its delicate blossoms prematurely.
Oh no.
But because the climate is now chaotic and unstable, a brutal late frost will inevitably sweep down in March or April. The freezing temperatures instantly crystallize the water inside the exposed blossoms, turning them brown and killing them overnight.
And the brutal reality of an apple tree is that if you lose the blossom, you lose the fruit. The entire year's harvest is gone in a single cold snap because the tree's evolutionary synchronization with the seasons was broken.
Entire regional economies can be wiped out in a single night. And even if the blossoms manage to survive the erratic spring frosts, they face another massive existential hurdle, which is the pollinator crisis.
Right, the bees.
Because as heavily engineered, cloned, and chemically controlled as these monoculture orchards are, they still absolutely rely on an uncontrollable wild element to actually produce the fruit.
That is the ultimate humbling reality of industrial agriculture. You can have the most advanced computer-controlled drip irrigation systems, the best chemical fertilizers, and million-dollar automated harvesting machines. But earlier, you mentioned that apple trees are self-incompatible. They cannot fertilize themselves.
They cannot. To set a piece of fruit, An apple blossom requires pollen from a genetically different apple tree to be physically moved and deposited onto its stigma.
Right.
And the apple tree cannot do this itself. It relies entirely on an insect, usually honeybees, bumblebees, or hoverflies, to act as the courier.
And the insects are disappearing.
If the local insect populations collapse, which is happening globally due to habitat loss, climate stress, and the overuse of agricultural pesticides, the yields collapse entirely.
That's terrifying.
There are already regions in the world where pesticide use has so thoroughly annihilated local pollinator populations that human workers have to walk through the orchards with tiny brushes, hand-pollinating every single blossom to ensure a harvest.
Hand-pollinating. That is absurd.
It is. The apple quietly reveals that humans, despite all our technological arrogance, are not independent from wild ecosystems. We are entirely reliant on them.
And the most tragic, poignant irony in all of this brings us right back to where we started our journey, the ancestral homeland, the wild Malus sieversii forests in the Tian Shan Mountains of Kazakhstan.
Yes. Those ancient wild forests, the primordial soup that birthed the apple millions of years ago, are currently highly endangered. They are under immense threat from aggressive logging for timber, overgrazing by domestic livestock, creeping agricultural replacement, and the shifting climate lines. The original ancestral populations are shrinking rapidly.
So let me get this straight. The most famous successful fruit in the world, the one we've cloned hundreds of millions of times and spread to every corner of the globe, is currently watching its original wild homeland get paved over and wiped out.
That is exactly what is happening.
That is deeply heartbreaking. But I want to ask you about the hard science of saving it. Because our sources mention that botanists and geneticists are desperate to protect these wild Kazakh forests, not just for sentimental or historical reasons, but for the actual survival of the global industry.
Oh, absolutely.
How does saving these wild, small, sometimes ugly, bitter genetics actually save the modern, perfect supermarket apple?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, biodiversity is the ultimate form of resilience. The wild forests of Kazakhstan, along with the thousands of forgotten heirloom varieties rotting in old abandoned orchards, are essentially a vast living genetic library. Right. In those wild, unrefined genes, there is hidden resistance to terrible droughts. There is immunity to the fungi and bacteria that are currently ravaging our cloned orchards. There is the genetic tolerance for irregular, warmer winters.
The answers are in the wild code.
Yes. As climate change and new pathogens continue to batter our fragile, genetically identical monocultures, the only way we will be able to breed new, climate-resilient apples for the future is to go back into that wild genetic library.
We have to crossbreed them.
We have to find those ancient survival traits and meticulously crossbreed them back into our modern crops. If we lose the wild forests of Kazakhstan, we permanently burn down the biological library. We lose the memory of how the apple knows how to survive.
This constant, agonizing tension between our human desire to completely control nature through cloning and chemistry and our absolute, unavoidable reliance on the wild chaos of nature to save us brings us to the ultimate meaning of this tree.
It's a deep tension.
Because despite all the heavy industry, the global shipping logistics, and the genetic engineering, an apple tree still remains a deeply philosophical, intimate presence in our lives.
It does. And to truly understand the philosophy of the apple tree, you have to look at its physical scale.
The scale.
The apple tree is uniquely human-scaled. An unpruned apple tree typically grows anywhere from 2 to 12 meters tall. It has a broad, welcoming crown, and its roots are relatively shallow, usually only reaching 1 to 3 meters deep.
Right, it doesn't dwarf you.
Yeah.
You don't stand at the base of an apple tree and feel overwhelmed by its terrifying majesty the way you would looking up at a 200-foot California redwood or an ancient sequoia.
No, not at all.
You can easily climb into the branches of an apple tree. You can reach up and prune its limbs with your own hands.
Yeah.
You can sit comfortably in its shade and have a conversation.
That specific physical scale is exactly why it generates such a specific psychological atmosphere. The apple tree doesn't inspire awe, and it certainly doesn't inspire fear. It radiates a kind of conscious humanity.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
It feels emotionally mature, almost companionable. It naturally invites gathering. And the symbolism of the orchard reflects this maturity. As we discussed earlier, the orchard represents delayed gratification and intergenerational care. It is a long, slow, quiet conversation between human beings and the passage of time.
But there is a haunting, beautiful duality built right into the center of that conversation. The orchard, as a physical place, has incredible permanence.
True.
An ancient, gnarled apple tree can outlast generations of the family that originally planted it. It can stand in a field and witness births, deaths, wars, and the passage of centuries. But the product of that tree, the fruit itself, is the exact opposite of permanent.
The fruit is incredibly fragile. The beauty of the apple is defined by its temporary nature. The moment it reaches peak ripeness and falls from the branch, the clock starts.
It starts decaying immediately.
The skin bruises at the slightest impact. The white flesh oxidizes and turns brown rapidly when exposed to the air. It collapses, ferments, and rots back into the soil faster than almost any other food we cultivate.
It's fleeting.
And that contrast is the core philosophical lesson of the apple tree. Life is not defined by its permanence, but by its capacity for renewal.
It's the contrast that makes it poignant.
The apple orchard in late autumn is so emotionally loaded because it visually represents peak beauty right at the absolute edge of decline.
Yeah.
The heavy, sweet fruit is hanging on a branch that is about to lose all its leaves to the frost. It teaches us that sweetness exists precisely because it does not last forever.
Wow.
The tree survives not by turning to stone and resisting change like a monument, but by shedding its leaves, enduring the bitter, freezing darkness of winter dormancy, and trusting that the blossoms will return when the earth warms again. It participates fully in the cycle.
The apple tree is a living record of humanity learning that every gift has a cost. You get the divine knowledge, but you lose the paradise of ignorance. You get the explosion of sweetness, but you watch it quickly decay. You invent the perfect cloned commercial fruit, but you lose the genetic resilience needed to survive the future.
Exactly.
When you stand back and look at an apple tree, it reflects back our absolute best human traits. Our patience, our capacity to nurture, our long-term stewardship of the land for our children.
Right.
But it also unflinchingly reflects our worst traits. Our vanity, our tendency toward greedy overconsumption, and our deeply arrogant illusion that we can exert total, sanitized control over nature through industrial agriculture.
It holds up a mirror to all of it.
So what does this all mean? When we started this deep dive an hour ago, the apple was just a shiny red snack sitting in a bowl on your kitchen counter. But if we've done our job today, that ordinary piece of fruit has completely shifted.
It should now be visible to you as a cunning traveler that hitchhiked across the Silk Road, trading its high-calorie sweetness for global expansion.
It is an immortal clone, surgically grafted by human hands to freeze time.
It is a mythological heavy hitter that defined our deepest stories of temptation, destructive desire, and mortality.
It is the ultimate botanical mirror of human civilization, reflecting our desperate desire to domesticate the wild while quietly, firmly reminding us that we are still entirely dependent on the flight of a bee, the chill of the winter frost, and the health of the soil.
Well said.
And we want to leave you with one final, brand new thought to mull over the next time you are standing in your kitchen holding an apple. We have talked a lot about how humans hijack the apple to build our civilization. But I want you to consider the inverse. The apple has manipulated us into making it completely reliant on our survival.
It's a crazy thought experiment.
Because we have spent thousands of years obsessively cloning the sweet, perfect apples through grafting. Those specific commercial varieties, the Honeycrisp, the Fuji, the Granny Smith, have entirely lost the ability to reproduce themselves naturally.
They literally cannot do it.
If human civilization were to mysteriously disappear tomorrow and there was no one left to perform the delicate surgery of grafting, the sweet-eating apple would effectively go extinct within a single generation.
The grafted trees would eventually die of old age or disease. The apples that fell to the ground would sprout from seeds, and because of that wild genetic roulette wheel, the offspring would immediately revert back to the chaotic, bitter, hard crab apples of the wild forests.
The sweet, perfect apple you hold in your hand is entirely dependent on humanity's continued existence. It's a biological artifact that only exists as long as we do. It's a beautiful, terrifying codependency.
It really is.
Something to think about during your next afternoon snack. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.